There are 27 million slaves in the world today. Men, women, and children held against their will. Forced to work without pay. Controlled by violence every day.
Slavery is what slavery has always been. It's about one person completely controlling another person using violence and then exploiting them economically, paying them nothing. That's what slavery is about.
Slavery is not legal anywhere, but thriving everywhere. In Africa, Asia, and here in the United States. The CIA reports 50,000 women and children are smuggled into the U.S. each year as sex and domestic slaves, or locked away in sweatshops, tricked into coming here with offers of a good job and an education, terrorized into staying. It happened to Dora, Christine, and Rosaline.
I get up around like 6 o'clock, something 6:30. I go back to bed like around 2:30.
I was helping her, taking care of the kids, doing everything in the house. You know, I wasn't getting paid and stuff. So I lived in the house for about 3.5 to 4 years.
They used to hit me. I can't go for 3 days without them beating me up.
Dora escaped by jumping from a moving car. Ironically, she was enslaved in this house by an official of the World Bank, an organization that supposedly tries to alleviate the plight of the world's poor.
Dora's been talking about working here, and we'd like to give your mum the opportunity to tell her side of the story.
Joyce Arimka works with freed slaves in Washington, D.C.
There is so little awareness. Americans don't want to believe that modern-day slavery is occurring.
Listen, on the wind you hear their voices. On a strong wind, you can feel the sweat of their despair, fear and pain. Will you listen?
In India, thousands of children have been kidnapped by slave traders or tricked into slavery in the carpet belt. 5,000 children are missing in the poor, remote region of Bihar.
My son Hero was just 6 years old when he disappeared with a cousin. When I couldn't find him, I thought I was going mad. I felt so empty inside because my child was missing. His mother, too, was going mad.
Huro's been gone 5 years. He doesn't even know some of his younger brothers and sisters. Chiche's best shot at seeing his son again lies with the South Asian Coalition Against Child Servitude, or SACS. The organization rescues 3,000 children a year from slavery. SACS thinks it's found Huro.
I just pray to God that my child will be found. The moment he sets eyes on me, he'll start to weep, and he won't stop.
Chiche comes for the raid on the loom.
You may choose to turn away, but one thing is clear. Oh, if you listen, you will hear. Oh, the voices of a million souls, helpless, hopeless souls, into slavery, bought and sold.
At last, Chiche has found his son.
If you listen, you will hear the cries of desperation. It's the shame of the nations. If you listen, you will hear. You will
These young men are slaves in Africa.
they're working on the lower end of the economic ladder. It tends to be raw materials, agriculture, basic stuff that feeds into the local economy. But all over the world, there are also slaves making things that feed into the world economy.
Things like cocoa. Half the world's cocoa comes from the Ivory Coast. Many cocoa farms there use slaves, which means that some of the chocolate we eat comes from slave labor.
In the old days, slaves were expensive. Today, they're cheap. There's a glut of slaves, and when you've used them, you throw them away if you don't want them anymore. They're disposable.
Slaves like these men cost the equivalent of $40,000 in the Deep South during the 1850s. Today, the average slave cost $90. A local journalist in the Ivory Coast uses an undercover camera to show just how easy it is to get a good deal on people. It takes 30 minutes and about $80 to buy these two men. They come from Mali, hoping to work for a better life. Their purchase in the market turns out to be just a warning for the men who so narrowly avoided slavery.
He said that if anyone escaped, he would be caught and killed.
No one warned these 19 young men from Mali. They demonstrate the beatings they survived. Others weren't so lucky. They've never even tasted chocolate.
When people eat chocolate, they're eating my flesh.
The people watching this may think, well, why don't we just stop buying chocolate? But I have to tell you, that can actually make things worse. We have to make it clear to the multinationals that slavery is too high a price to pay for cheap goods.
There are pockets of success around the world in preventing slavery, freeing slaves, and rehabilitating those that have been freed. Not too long ago, 30,000 people were enslaved in Brazil, making charcoal for the steel industry. The public outcry forced change. Within 3 years, all the slaves were freed. Kevin Bales recently testified in Washington, D.C. Penalties against traffickers are now tougher. In West Africa, Free the Slaves has worked with the chocolate industry and other organizations to uncover the exact extent of the slavery problem. Together, they are building an inspection system that will take slavery out of chocolate for good. And in India, Sachs not only rescues children from slavery, it also mends their spirits and educates them, making them leaders when they return to villages where almost no one can read or write.
If you are illiterate, anyone can cheat you. If I am literate, no one can cheat me.
Such schools are funded by the Rugmark Foundation that investigates and ensures consumers that children have not labored over the expensive carpets. The Rugmark stamp adds about $2 to the cost of a rug.
And we believe that's a small price to pay for that peace of mind that by buying that rug, you're not getting involved in the child slavery problem.
Also in northern India, women have formed small credit unions and bought their freedom. Achieving economic independence means they no longer fear debt bondage and slavery. Their increased incomes now support local schools for the children they have taken out of the workplace. Free the Slaves, an American-based nonprofit organization, is supporting these programs and more, including encouraging governments to enforce their own anti-slavery laws. There are more slaves today than at any other time in human history.
Every one of us is benefiting from slavery around the world. We could eradicate slavery. The laws are in place. The multinationals, the World Trade Organization, the United Nations, they could end slavery. But they're not going to do it until and unless we demand that they do it.
Now is the time.
It's a shame.